Thank you for joining me today as we work through this problem where we're going to find the truth table of P or if Q then R, and we're going to find the truth table of P or Q and R. So now as we look at this and we want to start off, the first thing we need to notice is what are the simple statements involved in these larger compound statements. And so when we look at these, we notice there's P, Q's, and R's. So when we're making our truth table, we have to make sure that we have a column for all three of those, P, Q, and R. And so now we're going to go ahead and do that. Notice that as we move the truth table for P, Q, and R, what we have is with these three statements, each one can be either true or false. So in each case, we have two options. Since we have two options for three different things, we have 2 times 2 times 2 total options. So we have 8 total options. Now in each of these cases, what I'm going to do, in order to make sure that I get each of the options included in my rows and I don't repeat any, I'm going to follow some type of pattern. If you want to use a different pattern, that's okay. But the way I like to do this is, I start with the first one, and since there's going to be 8 total options, I do 4 truths and then 4 falses. Moving on to the second one, instead of doing 4 at a time, I do 2 at a time. So 2 truths, 2 falses, 2 truths, 2 falses. And for the third one, I'm going to alternate every one, and I'm going to say true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, so that we get all 8 options written out without any repetition. Now that we have that done, we're going to move on and look at the next smallest statement we can find. So notice the P's, Q's, and R's were as small as we can get. If we look at both of these, the next smallest thing we can look at is, well, if we try to do a P or, we'd have to get a if Q then R in here, so that if Q then R is the next smallest statement on this one. And if we look at this one, if we try to do an R and, we also have to do this OR. So we're going to do the OR first, and then we'll combine them together with an AND. So that is, we're going to make a column for if Q then R, and a column for P or Q. So now, when we make the columns for these new statements, which are combining some of our previous statements, the way we're going to do that is we're going to look at the corresponding columns. So if we have if Q then R, we're going to look at the Q column, and we're going to look at the R column. So I want to get if Q then R, and so I'm going to look at the truth table as I go through, and I'm going to read this as if true then true. Remember that the if then statement is true if either both are true or the if part is false. So as we're reading this, we say if true then true is in fact going to be a true statement. So in this row we say that if Q then R is true. If we look at the second row, we have if true then false, which means that we have the if part true, the then part false. Therefore we have that the if then is going to be false. And so if we continue down, we have if false then true, the if part is false, therefore the statement isn't making any claims, so it is true. Again, if false then false is also true, and then if true then true is true, if true then false is false, if false then true is true, and if false then false is true. And so we've constructed this column for our truth table. Now, as we move on to our column for our P or Q, what we're going to do is we're going to now look at the columns P with the column Q, and we're going to combine them with an OR. So that is, OR is true if at least one is true. So we're going to look at the columns and say, is at least one true? So if we look at the first row of the columns, so we have P, Q, we have true or true. And we're going to have that true or true is true because both of them are true, therefore at least one is true. If we look at the second row, we have if true or true is again true. In the third row, we have if true then false. So in this row we have true because P is true, therefore at least one is true. And then if true or false again is true. And if we look at the fifth row, we have if false or true. So the Q in this case is true, so the whole thing is true. And then in the sixth row, we again have if false or true. And then we have false or false. Since both are false, we don't have any truths. So that makes this whole thing false. And then for the last row, we have false or false again. So again, we get another false. Now that we've completed that column, it's time to look back up at our statements and try to find the next biggest statement. So notice we've done now P, Q, R. We've done P, Q, R. We've done P or Q. We've done if Q then R. So now we can expand out and say, well, P or if Q then R. And we can also do P or Q and R by combining the things that we have previously. So now we're going to make columns for those objects. Alright, now that we've created the columns for those statements, we're going to look at which columns we need to look at in order to determine the statements. So the first one we have P or if Q then R, and so I'm going to look at P, which is going to be this column, and I'm going to look at if Q then R, which is going to be this column. So now as I read that, this is an OR, so I need at least one to be true out of those two columns. So I'm going to look at the first row of both of those columns, and I'm going to get true or true. Remember that because both are true, at least one is true, so we get that the OR statement is true. If we look at the second row, we get true or false. Again, at least one is true, so we end up with true. If we look at the next row, we have true or true, which is true. Then again, we have true or true is true. And now that we move down to the fifth row, we have false or true, which is true. Then we have false or false. So now in this case, we don't have either one of them to be true, so we end up with the OR is false. If we look at the last two rows over here, we have true, so false and true, false or true. So in both of those cases, because at least one is true, the OR becomes true, and so we end up with true for those last two rows. Now for our last column, we're going to look at P or Q and R. So we're going to look at the columns of P or Q and the column of R. So now again, because we're using an AND here, we want to recall that AND means both of them have to be true simultaneously. So as we're writing these, we're checking the truth values, and it's going to be true if both are true and false otherwise. Therefore, if we look at the first row, we get true or and true. So true and true is in fact true. And then false and true is false because at least one of them is false. And then true and true again is true. And false and true is false. And true is true. False and true is false. True and false is false. And then false and false is false. Therefore, we have now completed our truth table for these two statements. And here I just want to point out we worked it out one step at a time, starting off with our simple statements P, Q, and R. Then we moved out to our next biggest statements, if Q then R, and P or Q. Then we worked out to P or if Q then R, and P or Q and R. Now, as a final statement here, I just want to point out that we can also look at, does this imply this, or does this imply this, or are they equivalent, or none of the above? So what it means for one logical statement to imply another is that whenever the first is true, the second is true. So if we want to check, does this imply this, what we need to do is we now need to look at these columns, and we need to determine, okay, everywhere this first one is true, is the second one true? So as we look through, we have a true in the green column, leads to a true in the orange column, so we would keep checking. And in the second row, we have a true in the first column and a false in the second column. So what we end up with is a case where the first one is true, but the second one is false. So we would say that this statement does not imply this statement, because we are able to find an example of a time when the first one was true but the second one was false. Now, in order to determine if the second implies the first, we do the same thing in the reverse order. So we would say, well, here in the orange column we have a true, so we have to check the green column. We have a true, so we're okay so far. We don't have to worry about the falses, so we just move to the next row. Here we have a true, and then in this row we also have a true in the green column, so we're okay to continue on. Then we have a false, we don't have to worry about it. The true in this column, I have to check the other column in the same row, and I do indeed get a true over here. And then I have falses that I don't have to check, and now that I'm at the bottom, we note that every time that there was a true in the orange column, there was also a true in the green column. Therefore, we would say that this statement implies this statement. Or that is, we would write that P or Q and R implies P or if Q then R. So then, as I said, we had P or Q and R implies P or if Q then R. So if you'd like to see more problems, you can check out the rest of this playlist available up here. Also, please sure to subscribe to the channel so you can see when we have more of these coming up. In addition to that, you can also check out the link available in the description below to see the written version of each of these problems so that you can pull that up to follow along with the video or to do on your own for extra practice. Thank you and good luck with your studying.